My name is Ray Farmer. I'm the Director of the Department of Insurance here in South Carolina, and I appreciate you coming out on a day that you probably had other things to be doing in other places to be with us for this extremely important public hearing on probably, right now, it's probably our highest priority at the Department of Insurance, long-term care insurance. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, by the year of 2020, over 12 million of our senior citizens, and I'm leading the pack, so y'all don't have to, if I say something about a senior citizen, I'm looking in the mirror, will need some kind of a long-term care. Long-term care is defined differently, but you know what it is. It's either provided by a nursing home or assisted living or in-home care. So a product was developed a few years back called long-term care insurance to help us as consumers to either pay for some of those services or all of those services, or at least to protect our assets. I will tell you that long-term care insurance is a challenge, is as a regulator. When the product came on the market 30 or 40 years ago, quite honestly, it was mishandled by the insurance industry in a number of ways. Actuaries missed their targets, their assumptions. They were wrong. The product was underpriced. Product was sold a lot, because, it's a valuable product. I'll tell you right off the bat, I've got it myself, my wife has it, and, we're going through the same things you're going through. But the product was underpriced, it was oversold, and we understood as consumers, whether we heard this or not, we certainly understood it, that our rates would not go up. Well, they have. And insurance companies missed another assumption. They thought that as normal, we'll have our coverage for a little while and then we'll drop the coverage. Less than 1% of the people that purchased long-term care insurance dropped their coverage. So that's a challenge from us as consumers. For companies, they've lost their shirts. They've missed the targets, they've lost their shirts. In 2002, we had over 100 companies writing this line of coverage, over 100. 2014, less than 12, you'd be hard pressed to find 6 or 8 companies that write the business. 2002, there was 750,000 policies sold in that year. 2014, 129,000. Shows that insurance companies, yeah, they're in business to make a profit, and that's okay. And if they're not going to make a profit, they're not going to write it. So my job as a regulator is to make sure there's competition in the marketplace, make sure those companies that are in the marketplace are solvent. So there's, issues on both sides, and our concern today is for those people that bought the coverage, 20, 30, or 40 years ago. If you buy the coverage today, it's different. It's part of a life insurance product. Half of it would be life insurance, half of it could be used for long-term care. For example, if you have a $100,000 policy, you could use up to $50,000 for long-term care. That is a product that is sold today, and it is probably more actuarially adequate than what they sold 20 or 30, 40 years ago. So if someone buys the coverage today, they're pretty well informed, I believe. And so our concerns are those that purchased it 20 or 30 years ago. We're being priced out of the product. From time to time, one of the good parts of my job is to talk to consumers. We've got a great consumer services unit. They answer consumers' questions about this product and every other product, insurance product, day in and day out. We've even early on expanded the hours so they could do that a little bit longer. They're pros at what they do, but sometimes I get to talk to consumers myself. I've talked to some of you in this room. Those have not been short conversations. I've kept you on the phone, some of you over an hour, talking about this product, and it's okay. I enjoy doing that. You are the reasons that we're here today. Those of you that I've talked to, those of you that I haven't talked to. Insurance companies that have come in my office and say, we need rate increases. So I'll tell you, what we see in our office is rate increases that are astronomical. You pick a number, 60, 70, 80, 100%. And companies can justify it. They're losing money on it. They can justify that. Folks, we can't afford to pay that. So for the last 5.5 years that I've been in the office, we've taken a little bit different approach. Companies have come in and, you know, we can't grant that large increase. And quite honestly, unless there's a solvency concern, you know, companies have not gotten an increase higher than 20%. You add a couple of those up, though, and that's substantial. So we look at every rate filing that comes through our office. We study it. We have a rate analyst who's here today. I'll have the staff raise their hand in a few minutes, but our rate analyst has done this for a long. She's got a PhD in mathematics. We have a supervisor that looks over her work. Then we have our actuary here that's been doing this for 25 years, a credentialed actuary. We're looking at all their numbers, and their numbers are accurate, but we cannot afford those big rate increases. That's why you're here today. That's why we're all here today for the most part. We'll hear other reasons, but for the most part, that's it. So the purpose of today's meeting is for us to continue the dialogue. I want to hear from anyone in this room that wants to speak. We're here for the duration. We'll be here several hours if need be. So, like I said, I want to hear from everybody. We're not going to agree on everything. We're going to disagree. We won't be disagreeable. We're here in South Carolina, and we have manners. As you know, for the last 3 years, we've had some kind of natural disaster. 2015, we had the flood, 16, Hurricane Matthew, and 2017, a little bit of Hurricane Irma. So only one time in those 3 disasters have I had to talk to one company that it's based in the northern part of this country and tell them that we are in South Carolina and we do respect our people and we do use manners. And from that point forward, they did. So we will we'll disagree, and that's okay. You consumers can say anything that you want about companies, about the department. Please don't hold back. This is being videotaped, so we'll have the record if we need to. Now, I realize it's a little bit after 1 o'clock, and probably some of you had lunch, some of you didn't. But I've had a number of hearings over the last 5.5 years, and one thing I do is make sure we have a few snacks. So we've got some cookies and cupcake-looking things back there in the back from a local bakery, Silver Spoon, and I will tell you quickly that they were not bought at state expense. That's something that I enjoy doing, and quite honestly, I'm not going to have you eat something that hadn't been tested. So I've already done it, and it's good. So I would recommend anything back there. And there's soft drinks and water. And so we'll see how we do, whether we need a break after some of us speak. But there are restrooms in the back. Feel free to go and come as you need to. So when I get finished here in just a moment, we're going to hear from Robert Eaton from Milliman, an actuarial firm, and he's going to kind of set the stage for us about long-term care. And then right after that, we're going to hear from our consumers. After consumers have had their say, we have interested parties. We have the AARP, who we could not have done this without, and we certainly appreciate your help in every step of the way. This is a good partnership. We've done this before in other senior events. We'll do more of them. And then we'll hear from some folks that sell the coverage, insurance agents. We'll hear from an elder law spokesperson. And then to wrap things up, we'll hear from the insurance companies. We have a lot of people that are signed up, and so we have a lot of people to hear from. If you can keep your remarks, consumers, 5 to 8 minutes, that would be appreciated. Company people, 5 minutes. And for the company people, I'll be sitting on the second row, and one of us will show you when you have 2 minutes left and 1 minute left, and then tell you to wrap it up. But we do want to hear from consumers. Consumers need to voice their thoughts, their opinions to insurance companies. But we also need to hear from insurance companies. This is a dialogue that has been started. It needs to continue. We'll see by the end of this thing, there are no silver bullets. They're really not. But we all have an interest in this, a strong interest in it. And so we're not going to get to a conclusion unless we talk about it. And so I appreciate you being here. Certainly appreciate you coming out on today. So Robert, why don't you come and take a few minutes. Now Robert's presentation will be on our website shortly after, probably about, give us till tomorrow. It'll be on our website, doi.sc.gov, where there's an awful lot of information on there for consumers and companies alike. Robert, thank you for coming.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. As Mr. Farmer mentioned, my name is Robert Eaton. I'm an actuary. I'm the chairperson of the Society of Actuaries Long-Term Care Section Council. It's a group within the Society of Actuaries and some other interested folks who really care about the long-term care insurance industry, and we elect a section council to kind of guide what we do. That includes thought leadership and educational outreach. And I was asked by Mr. Farmer and Joe Cregan to come here today and to provide some educational outreach on long-term care insurance. Here's a short disclaimer. These are my own thoughts, not the Society of Actuaries or my employer. The purpose that I came here today to talk to you all about is to provide a basic explanation of long-term care insurance product features, the pricing and the reserving, and the premium rate increases that long-term care insurance companies are concerned with. This explanation is pretty simplified. It's not meant for a very technical audience. So we'll talk about long-term care insurance products 101. Long-term care insurance benefits pay out upon disability, as you probably all know. Most policies, or many policies, also require the receipt of long-term care services in the home, or maybe in an assisted living facility, or in a skilled nursing facility, or a nursing home. So long-term care insurance is different than some insurance companies, insurance products like life insurance. It doesn't pay out a lump sum. Instead, a benefit is paid out every day, up to a maximum amount per day or per month. And most policies don't pay during the entire disability episode. They'll just pay until the disability lasts for a certain amount of time, for instance. So by law, policies have to cover the insured for their entire life. They're often sold at the beginning with the option to automatically increase the benefits so that they can keep up with the increasing cost of care. So who has a low chance of actually ever using their long-term care insurance policy? Folks that are married couples, and also people who have just purchased a long-term care insurance policy. So if I went with my wife and we went to purchase a long-term care insurance policy, it would probably not be as costly as if I bought it when I was 50 or 60, and we would have a really low chance of using it in the next year or so. But let's talk about who has a high chance of using our long-term care insurance policy. And these are going to be folks who are living alone, perhaps folks who are widowed, folks who are older on in age. And so if you think about that trend over time, we generally see that the chance of using your long-term care insurance policy increases over time. So it's not very high right when you buy your policy, but it's a lot higher later on in life. So let's talk about long-term care insurance premiums. Long-term care insurance companies and actuaries price these premiums to be level amounts. However, as we know, as I just talked about, the claims from the long-term care insurance policies, we know that they increase over time. And so this creates what we'll call a mismatch between these two cash flows, where premiums are level over time, but claims will go up over time. So in order to kind of account for that, insurers set aside some of the premiums into, in the early years, into a reserve account. And here's the long-term care actuarial piggy bank. I have one on my desk, actually. Insurers use this reserve to fund the claims later on in the policy duration. So as you see later on, those earlier premiums put into the piggy bank are used to take out later on. So we set premiums aside. Here's kind of a breakdown of how premium dollars are actually used by the insurance companies. Some of the premiums are used to administer the policy. So this is to pay for the rent and the employee costs, to run a business. Some of the insurance premiums are used to pay the agent who sold the policy. Some are used to pay state and federal taxes. Other parts of your premium, when they're initially sold, may be distributed to shareholders as profits. And then finally, what I'll call the last chunk is the reserve fund, which is used to pay for the future benefits. So this reserve fund acts like a savings account. Those net premiums, so these are all of the premiums that are not intended to pay for expenses, that are not intended to pay for taxes, that are not intended to go to profits or anything. Those premiums are deposited into the bank, and then later on, in the course of the policy, they're withdrawn from that account. And like a savings account, it earns interest. And the savings account, I think it's important to know, it's held for the benefit of all of the policyholders who have a long-term care insurance policy, but you can only use those funds to pay for those folks who actually have a long-term care insurance claim later on. So part of that reserve is not paid to people who die or to people who stop paying premiums. So those net premiums, those amounts that we contribute into the reserve, those are like scheduled deposits. We determine those based at the beginning of the policy, and they're based on a lot of estimates, a lot of actuarial estimates. Those actuaries assume the amounts that are going to be withdrawn, so the benefit payments. So how many people will go on claim and how long they'll last on claim. The net premiums, the scheduled deposits are also based on the interest that's going to be earned. That reserve amount will grow over time with interest. And if either of those two numbers are different, if either of those estimates differ than what the insurance company assumed at the beginning, the account might not have enough to cover the future withdrawals. So, what can go wrong? I think Mr. Farmer already described what he thought went wrong, and I would say he's largely right. I don't think there's any kind of disagreement among the folks in the industry about that. So the interest rate can change if the economy changes, and the changes in the economic conditions over the last 20 years or so have led to a dramatic drop in interest rates. And you all may have seen this if you lease a new car. Interest rates today are far lower than they were in the 90s or so when these products, these long-term care insurance policies were priced. And many companies assumed in the 1980s and 1990s that they would earn 6 or 7 or 8% on their reserves, but instead, the rates that companies have earned have dropped to rates as low as 3 or 4% that they can earn. So aside from the interest rate, what are the other things that impact the bank account and the reserve? Well, there's 3 key things that impact what money is withdrawn from that bank account. The first is the number of people that keep their policies up to the point when the benefit is paid. So how many people are hanging on to their policies until they actually need a claim? That's the first key item. So I have a little diagram. So here's an assumption where you have, here's a case, a scenario where you have 20 folks who purchase long-term care insurance right at the beginning of the policy, but in the later years, the insurance company estimated not all of them will be around. Some of them will have died. Some of them will have decided that insurance just wasn't worth it for them. Maybe they have some other way to fund long-term care claims. So in later years, we see that fewer people have the policy, and of those, a certain amount of them will actually end up using the benefit. Long-term care insurance is a catastrophic benefit. Ideally, we don't have to use it. Ideally, we never have to use the policy until we die, and we don't have a chronic disability. But the reality is, of those same 20 folks that the insurance company looked at when they bought the policy, it turns out a lot more people held on to their policies. And one way to think of that is everybody's recognizing how valuable these insurance policies are to them. And then the question is, when you have more people sticking around into later years holding on to their policies, how many of them might end up using their benefits? So in a way, this is a good thing for a lot of us. People sticking around with your insurance policy, that means you might be living longer, and I think that's generally true. People are generally living longer, and we see that year after year. There's a couple of exceptions to that. And then more people have kept their policies than they originally anticipated, than long-term care insurance companies originally anticipated happening. The second major item, determining how much we need to withdraw from the savings account, is of the people who are left with their policies, how many of them end up using their benefits? So we talk about the same kind of scenario. We got the 20 folks who purchased the policy, and a long-term care insurance company estimated that 9 of them would be left, maybe after 30 or 40 years. And of those, only 3 of them would end up actually using their benefits. So even if they were correct on the number of people who ended up keeping their policy to later years, it could be that more people end up actually using their policy. So the frequency, the amount of claims that people actually made were higher than they thought initially. And this has been kind of mixed. Some companies have seen this number be higher. Some have seen this number be a little lower. I think in general, it's slightly higher here. The number of people who actually go on claim, that portion of people has actually gone up a little bit. So let's talk about the third thing that goes into how much we need to withdraw from the savings account, and that's the amount that's paid out to the folks who actually use the benefits. Remember, it's not a lump sum that's paid out for a long-term care insurance policy. They don't give you $20 or $50 or $100,000. Rather, it's maybe reimbursing you over a period of time, or maybe it's a set amount that you might get per day or per month for long-term care. And that amount that's going to be paid is not known in advance. We don't know, how long a nursing home stay might last for any particular person if they purchase the policy when they're 50 or 60 years old. It depends on, the number of days of disability, the intensity of care, and the cost of care as well. So how do we make our estimates based on those future things, the number of days of disability, the intensity of care? We look to what's happened in the past. How long have people stayed in nursing homes, in the past, and the data that the insurance companies look through? How intense has the care been, and how much has the care cost And how much has that cost increased over time? And what we see generally is that the length of time in nursing homes has not changed very much, but more people are receiving care in assisted living facilities, and folks in assisted living facilities tend to live a lot longer. And that's led to overall more benefits being paid. So what happens when these estimates are not realized? So we have I'm going to propose a simple savings plan example. If I had a goal to save $10,000 over 10 years, this is how I would go about doing it. I'd save $1,000 every year, and that would add up over time. Here I'm just saving this in my checking account or my savings account, and I'm not collecting any interest or anything like that. But what happens when I take my original goal, and after 6 years I realize I don't need $10,000, I need $12,000. So I look to the future and I say, oh, I was wrong about needing $10,000. I was going to buy this used car for $10,000. Instead, I'm buying it for $12,000 because I want a nicer model. So I have a new goal after the 6th year. It's $12,000 that I need. And it took me like 6 years to realize that. So what do I need to do to increase my contribution to catch up to meet my goal? Well, I need to make up that $2,000 difference, and I've got 4 years to do it. So I actually have to increase my deposits by 50%, which seems like a lot. I have to increase them to $1,500 in order to meet that goal. But what if I knew from the beginning that I needed to collect the $12,000? My schedule in my mind, my hindsight, if I had perfect 20/20 hindsight, I would need to only put in $1,200. I would only need to increase my deposits by 20%. That's a pretty big difference, not realizing that I had to make those deposits after 6 years. I could have been contributing just $1,200 every year, but now I'm forced to stick with $1,500 every year. And so that you can see that kind of difference of the delay in time in recognizing what my new goal was. So here's how this example would work with a long-term care insurance policy. I've got that reserve fund that I talked about earlier, and I've got the future net premiums. These are the premiums that I expect to collect in the future based on people who have the policies right now. And I need those two things to balance out with the benefits I expect to pay in the future. This is sort of my balancing act that I, as a long-term care insurer, might have to play. So in this example, the net premiums and the reserve fund, they are enough to pay the future benefits. This model shows the two in balance. But I have an out-of-balance example where I have a reserve fund that we saw already, and I have future net premiums, but I look to the future and I see that my future benefits are far more than I expected. And here the model is out of balance. There's not going to be enough money to pay for those future benefits. So in order to restore the balance, one of the few things we can do is to increase premium rates. So in this block of long-term care insurance policies, we have our reserve fund, we have the future net premiums, and then I add on to that these catch-up premium rate increases. And in this kind of model I set up right here, those all combine to kind of restore balance, and they are able to meet the future needs of the company in terms of paying out the future benefits to people who still have the policies. So balance is restored in this example through rate increases. Now let's take a third example. In this example, I have my reserve fund and I have my future net premiums, and I have a rate increase that's not sufficient in order to fund the future benefits. So what makes up the last component? Here, I have to collect the remaining balance through other funds. If I'm a company, other fundings might come from company surplus, maybe a one-time deposit, ultimately from other shareholders or other policyholders. That surplus was was probably going to go to another use, but a company might take it to help make its long-term care insurance policies whole and restore balance. It could be taken as needed from the premiums of other policyholders as well. So that's really the end of my presentation. I really wanted to kind of share with you the basics of how a long-term care insurance policy is funded through premiums, how it builds up that reserve balance, and how that balance is used to pay for future claims. These are some of the things that can go wrong and how we can restore that balance.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah. Certainly appreciate you being here, and like I said, his presentation will be on our website in the near future, tomorrow. So this part of our program, we want to hear from our consumers. And I told you that we have our staff here, so anyone that's on staff at the Department of Insurance, they think they're just going to get to raise their hand, but stand up, please. And I won't, you on the front row, stand up. Consumers, look at these folks. They'll be here after or during the break if we take one. Feel free to ask them any question you've got. If they don't know the answer, they'll get you to the right person. But we're here to be helpful. So we please take advantage of them. Okay, thank you for being here as well. So one person that, a public servant that's helped us for 5.5 years is no longer a public servant, but he certainly has an interest in the insurance industry. And former Senator Joel Lurie is here. Senator, thank you for coming. We appreciate that. He's been helpful to us at the Department of Insurance from day one. So I told you earlier that I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of the folks in this room, and just coincidentally, the first person to sign up was one of the first people I talked to is Mr. Billy McKinnon. So, Mr. McKinnon, if you would come up and speak to us. Mr. McKinnon and I have had a number of conversations, and like I say, for him and several others that I've talked to, you encouraged me to have this, and this is the reason that we're here to help. Mr. McKinnon, share what's on your mind.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. My name is Billy McKinnon. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Now I can appreciate what the actuary said about the zero interest rate environment and why insurance companies aren't making any money and losing money. But I bought my policy from Aetna in 1994. That's 24 years ago. At the time, I was promised that the rate, it was a group life insurance, it was a group policy. And at the time, I was told that, or promised that the premium would not increase. At that time, for almost 21 years, I was paying about $20.99 a month. I know that sounds pretty low for long-term care insurance, but that was 24 years, premiums lasting over 24 years already. So I know that people now, when they buy it, they may be paying hundreds of dollars a month for the insurance. But starting about 3 or 4 years ago, well, before that, Aetna, I think, decided to get out of the long-term care insurance business, and the policy went to Prudential, and so now it's with Prudential. About 3 or 4 years ago, after almost 21 years of a stable premium, it started to go up, and it's continually going up. And you really can't talk to the people at Prudential because they don't. They're consumer people. They just don't talk to you, and they just kind of give you a brush off about the rate increase. When it increases, it's deducted out of my checking account every month, so I don't really pay much attention to it as on a daily basis or a monthly basis. But after a few months, then I noticed that the premium has gone up, and I'll call them and write them and ask them, to explain it and to reduce it, and they'll reduce it. but they won't return my money. And there's just nothing I can do about it. I think, you know, if it continues, first of all, I'm not going to drop the policy. Maybe that's what Prudential wants, is just to get out of, just drop it. But then I would lose premiums for a long period of time, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue with it. But I would advise anyone who did not already purchase long-term care insurance not to buy it, because the promises that they make about a stable premium remaining the same is just not true. It's not true. They're going to go up, and over time, I think people who buy the policies, they'll drop out of it, and then people who, as they get older and sicker, then they'll start to rely on the state of South Carolina to pay their Medicaid and medical bills. And so the whole weight of it will rest on the general population. People who thought a long time ago to take care of their own health needs in the future, they'll be, the state of South Carolina and the people in this state will be stuck with the bill. There's probably a lot more I got to say about it, but I'm just really frustrated with it. I can't get any responses from Prudential. The premiums keep going up, maybe not as much as most of the people here, but they keep going up, and they say they want a 20% increase every year, and that's a lot of money. And so I think that's about all I got to say.
Good, thank you, sir.
Oh.
Got one more thing to say?
Yeah.
All right, help yourself. We're good.
Because I'm talking extemporaneously, I just kind of
It's all right.
off the hat. One problem I got with it is I got a letter here from Prudential, and it pretty much says that the premium will remain the same. But when I deep dived into it and looked into it, they said that's not what it means. They said that only the terms and conditions would remain the same. When I asked them about what terms and conditions are they talking about, I can't get an answer. Maybe that's not something I should bring up to this general meeting here. Maybe that's something I should bring up with Prudential, but I can't talk to Prudential.
Well, the answer is both. You can bring it up here, but Prudential's here, and they are aware of your question. So before this is over with, you'll be talking to the Prudential people.
No, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Like I said, we've had a number of conversations I have with other folks, and like Mr. McKinnon, we get to a point that, can I afford this any longer? And so, you know, my advice, my suggestion is you make your own decision, but make sure it's informed. If you're thinking about dropping your long-term care insurance, call around and see what insurance pays for today. Nursing home, assisted living, in-home care, you're going to find it's going to be from $5,000 to $7,000 to $11,000 a month. And I know that because my wife asked me those same questions. She's asked me, what do you do for a living? So, so we've had that same discussion at our house, and we continue to pay because although it eats into your savings, it eats into your assets, in my opinion, it's still worthwhile to help protect those assets in the future. So our next speaker will be either Mr. Scott Morris or Ms. Sharon Morris, and she has told him that she will tell him what to do at this point. So Mrs. Morris, what? Yes, sir. I see what she has said. So come on up.
I appreciate it. I'm Mark Morgan. That's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not a problem. Having not met. In some respects, I thoroughly agree with the insurance companies. Every business, the costs continue to increase. And if the cost increase, I'm sorry, I took your place.
No, it's my fault, trust me.
That's okay.
My staff will let me know that.
We'll trade positions in a moment about that. You know, everybody's cost increases, and it's got to come from somewhere. And I recognize that. I don't really have a problem with a 20% to catch up. My concerns are, number one, how many 20%? Because a 20% this year and a 20% next year and a 20% next year is not 60%, that's more like 70% because you're
A
compounding.
little closer to the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're compounding the increase. Well, once you've compounded for 3 or 4 or 5 years and it continues on, you're talking a good chunk of money coming out of my static savings because I'm no longer working. And the other thing is understanding that they invested this money in the reserve account. They invested that money to make money. And those funds have not made as much as they thought they would. But in the future, if the economy improves and they're making more money, are they going to refund that portion back to us, or is that going to go as corporate profits and we're still paying the increased premiums? It's, you know, if you're making more off the money that I gave you than you thought you were gonna, then I should get a break on the next year's premium. It shouldn't be, okay, we're making more money, so we can pay out some more money to their shareholders, and if we turn out wrong next year, we'll just ask for some more rate increases. So I have a problem with that. There's no guarantee that, number one, there's a cap on how many 20% increases I can get over the next 10 years, 15 years. And at some point, it's just not going to be viable anymore to pay that money out. It doesn't do you any good to pay the money out and then run out of money, and now I can't pay the premiums, they cancel the policy, and then the year after that, I go into a long-term care. So you got to figure somewhere along the line, it's no longer a viable product for me to pay for. So that's kind of where I stand on it right now. My wife and I have talked. We probably will maintain ours for a while, for sure. But every year we have to look at it and say, is it viable for us in our current financial situation, and looking at the way the rest of the world is? You know, would I be better off to say, okay, I'll just hope I never go in, or I'll pay private care, you know, for 5 years and not pay nearly what I would have paying a 300% original premium. So that's kind of where we stand on ours. And I also know that there's not any hard and fast answers. Nobody's going to come up to me after this is over and say, yeah, we guarantee this is how it's going to be. I don't expect any guarantees, but I do expect some kind of forethought and some kind of written policy that says, here's what we plan to do at the very least. And that's my part. So,
Sure.
we're with Genworth Life.
And the Genworth people are here. Well, we've already made that introduction.
Yep. Yeah, my mother-in-law, her mother, had a Genworth policy, and they were wonderful. We have no complaint about Genworth particularly. The service has always been excellent for us. Her mother, bless my mother-in-law's soul, I love my mother-in-law to death, but she definitely got her money's worth from her long-term care policy. She and her husband both were in long-term care in Florida, and it got to where it was kind of a chore for us to go down and help out. We were the closest of the relatives. So we finally got them to move up here, and they were both in long-term care here. And then my father-in-law passed away. My mother-in-law stayed in long-term care for a significant period of time after that. She got a lot of benefit out of hers.
Good.
And it made it very worthwhile to see that. And as a comparison, my father did not have long-term care. He was retired civil service, and things kept getting cut and cut and cut on his insurance. He was paying for his out of pocket. And we were to the point when my father passed away that we could probably have maintained him for maybe another year, and then we were going to have to start paying the premiums for him to be in long-term care. He used up everything he had, his house, his car, all of his savings, and his every month retirement check. So it's worth it for me right now. I just don't know how much longer that's going to be a case. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Now, the real Mrs. Marsh will, now, I apologize, that's my fault.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me all right? Good. My name's Sharon Morris, and I'm here with my husband, Scott, and we're from Bluffton in Beaufort County. So, and thank you for having this opportunity to present our concerns. I appreciate that. Okay, we are really here to express our displeasure with the continuing rise of the costs of long-term care policies in South Carolina. As a retired registered nurse with over 40 years' experience in hospital administration, public health, home care, and pretty much everything you can think of in health care that I've done, as well as serving on the 3 senior citizens boards, including the Lieutenant Governor's Council on Aging, Jerry's at the back there, Beaufort County Senior Services, as well as the Beaufort County Coalition for Aging. I believe that we have real concerns for seniors throughout our state. On a personal level, I can say that in 2011, we purchased our long-term care policies through Genworth and an annuity through Edward Jones that was intended to increase in value and cover any reasonable increases in premiums over time. The annuity has performed as expected. However, the Genworth premium increases have outpaced our returns. Our premiums have increased over 62% since 2011. The amount is not sustainable on a fixed income. Since that time, we've done some research on Genworth, and the results are very troubling for seniors owning long-term policies with this company. Important information that's been reported is as follows. Genworth's long-term care insurance business has been wrongfully underfunded from 2010 to 2014, causing major losses to their long-term care reserves. This disclosure that the reserves were underfunded by $500 million caused a deterioration in their stock price. Specifically, GNW, which is their stock name, was worth $36.49 on April 30th, 2007. Then it was $16.52 on April 30th, 2010. And July 6th of this year, it's worth $4.58. Genworth has been sued repeatedly by shareholders since 2014 related to long-term care issues that included a $219 million settlement and a case alleging violations of federal securities laws relating to misleading investors and making false statements about the health of the long-term care reserves. Genworth is in the process of a merger with China Oceanwide Holdings Company Limited, which is headquartered in Beijing, China. We are very concerned about these rate increases, as many seniors cannot sustain the cost of the premiums. Our research on Genworth long-term care seems to indicate that many seniors are not getting the services and benefits they were promised through their policies. As well, we do not recall getting any information from Genworth about their upcoming merger with China Oceanwide. Our premiums are due to be paid this month before this merger, and we have no idea if our contract will be honored or what increases this new company may want to impose. We wonder if China Oceanwide, headquartered in Beijing, will be accountable to the South Carolina Department of Insurance. We have no assurances that in the future we will receive our long-term care for which we paid. And we're here, to request that the Department of Insurance investigate whether Genworth premiums increases are based primarily on Genworth's alleged improper financial dealings rather than the rising costs of health care, and to please investigate if the merger to China Oceanwide will adversely impact the delivery of care to the long-term policy holders. And we thank you for your attention, and we appreciate this opportunity to have this forum.
Thank you, Mrs. Morris.
Thank you.
And Mrs. Morris, Mr. Morris, the Genworth folks are here. They'll be glad to answer all those questions that they have. But just as to your premium and worried about paying it, the merger has not gone through. A lot of regulators are looking at that merger. The regulators of Delaware, regulators of New York and Virginia, and we have a small piece that we look at. They're going through that process right now. It's extensive, as you would imagine. So, but the Genworth guys, y'all raise your hand back there. They're pleasant. They'll be glad to chat with you at the break or right after. So our next speaker that's signed up is Mr. Robert Kunkel. Okay, that's perfect. And so you're not under any obligation to speak. This is your opportunity to do so, however. But if someone has already made your points, just do just like Mr. Kunkel has said, and just say, me too. These are, just because they've already been made, his concerns are just as valid as anyone else's that have been discussed. Mr. Robert Whitaker.
My name is Bob Whitaker from Piedmont, South Carolina, and I'll be 81 on July 16th, 2018. I'm a consumer, and I thank you for having this conference. In 1999, I turned 62 and opted to go on Social Security. I signed up for Medicare in 2002 when I turned 65. In 2002, when I turned 65, I needed a supplemental health insurance policy for my Medicare. My wife, who is younger than I, needed a health insurance policy until she would go on Medicare. In 2002, the internet was not practical for internet questions, assuming I even had a computer at that time. If one had a legal question, you talked to an attorney. And if you had an insurance question, you talked to an insurance agent. At the suggestion of a friend, I contacted a Janet Vines with an insurance agency in Greenville, South Carolina. We met with Janet and secured both those policies with her. She was knowledgeable and very helpful in presenting different companies' benefits and costs. By 2002, I was now very aware of what our income would be in retirement years. Our home was paid for, and we had and still have a simple lifestyle. Our future income was adequate. It was not adequate should one of us have a need for long-term care. We have 5 children and did not want to burden them, assuming any of them would have the financial ability to provide that service. We again contacted Janet Vines. She presented different companies' long-term policies, benefits, and costs. We picked John Hancock primarily on the basis of John Hancock being a very old, reliable, and a very good reputation, and a very stable company with decades of experience. We selected in 2002 the features and benefits we thought best suited our needs and within an affordable premium for us. I am sure I did not read the policy and relied on Janet Vine's explanations. It was my understanding the premium was fixed. I recall asking, and I doubt I would have purchased a policy that had an open-ended premium increase provision, or at the very least not tied to a defined third-party inflation factor like the CPI. I was very surprised when in 2012 I received a notice of a 20% increase in premium. I opted to reduce the compound inflation percentage and keep the same premium. Summary. I have not decided what I will do relative to the 2018 notice of an increase. It is obvious to me I did not do my due diligence when selecting the policy in 2002. I certainly don't have the answers of aging population numbers and reduced number of contributors, nor do I have much to do with the economy. I see in a Forbes article that John Hancock is now owned, or at least was, by Manulife Financial, a Canadian company, and who knows who owns them. I would prefer a United States-owned company. When I owned a small business, I only wish I could have sold a product or service with defined benefits, and I could decide how much I would charge in the future. Of course, in the long run, a word would spread of my policy, and I would lose most of my customers. Thank you.
Mr. Whitaker, that was well said. Thank you. Next is Mr. Robert McKinnon, who came from a long, long way as well. Mr. McKinnon and I have talked quite a bit also.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. First speaker you heard from today was Billy McKinnon. I'm Bobby McKinnon. And there's one thing I can tell you about the McKinnons. We believe in what's right's right and what's wrong is wrong. Isn't that right, Billy? I'm a 36-year state employee retiree, worked in the school systems for 36 years, so I earned my stripes, enjoyed every minute of it. One of the cornerstones of my retirement was to get a long-term care policy, in which I did in 2009 when I retired with Prudential. And I've paid the premium every year since, on time, yearly. I had no idea when I took out this policy, just like many of the speakers here today, that they had the right to jack the premiums up. It was never explained, and somebody's going to have to show me where it says that they can do that. Because it never was explained, never was given to me in writing that I'm aware of. Now, I wrote Mr. Farmer a letter in February 2018, and since we're videotaping and I want it in the record, I'm going to read this letter because it's got a lot of questions, some of which Mr. Farmer has answered, some of which have not been answered, and there's obviously people in here that have many of the same questions, and I want to make sure these questions get on the record. So I'm going to read this letter that was sent to Mr. Farmer. As I discussed by phone on February the 2nd, 2018, I am shocked that Prudential long-term care policies have been allowed to increase for year 2, 20% plus 16.7% for a total increase of 36.7%. As stated, the senior citizen will have no choice but to drop the policy as we're all on fixed incomes. As you requested, I am enclosing a copy of a Prudential attempt to sell more term care immediately after sending the 6.7 increase letter. It's hard to keep a straight face for customers who cannot afford the increase to begin with, much less buy more insurance. I am also requesting answers to the following questions. Number one, by what criteria did you justify the 2017 20% Prudential long-term care policy increase? Number two, by what criteria did you justify the 2018 16.7 Prudential long-term care increase? Number three, is there a Prudential long-term care policy increase in the works for 2019, and for that matter, beyond? Number four, by what authority does Prudential have the right to charge assumptions, have the right to change assumptions, thereby justifying premium increases? Number five, are you aware of the options offered by Prudential long-term care if the customer cannot afford the policy increase? If so, what options are you aware of? Number six, how did the options in question number 5 develop and are such a bad deal for the senior consumer? Were these options approved by you? Number 7 is lumped together with several short questions. How many South Carolinians owned Prudential long-term care policies in 2017? How many South Carolinians own Prudential long-term care policies in 2018? How many South Carolinians lost policies due to increases in premiums in 2017-18 or had to opt for lesser policies? How many South Carolinians, this is number 8, how many South Carolinians downgraded their long-term care policies due to increases in 2017 and 18? Question number 9. If the return on long-term care policies is so bad, why is Prudential Insurance still selling in South Carolina and most probably the southeastern region? Number 10, when Prudential Insurance long-term care was marketed to South Carolina employees as a group for years, why was it not explained to the group that cost could be jacked up dramatically? Number 11, for example, if Georgia or North Carolina decides not to raise long-term care rates at all, or less in North Carolina, or less than South Carolina's 3.6%, 36.7% over 2 years, will South Carolina then be supporting the long-term care insurance of other regions? How is this fair? Question 12, are you aware that a 36.7% long-term care insurance cost increase gives the appearance of a rigged game? I look forward to your information on these questions. Also, in our conversation with Mr. Farmer, I made the comment to him that the options that were given by Prudential to the consumer were appalling, and he agreed that the options were bad, really bad. Something needs to be done about it. And also I mentioned to him in our conversation, I'm not an attorney, but there may be grounds here for class action lawsuits. All right, I think that's all that I have at this time. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, Mr. McKinnon. So our next speaker is Mr. Martin, Charles Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farmer. I'd like to just publicly say I appreciate this opportunity. I'm glad that the state insurance department decided to call this hearing. I think it's past time, and I just appreciate the opportunity to have what I call an adult conversation today. In my company, we basically, the way we operate is we assume everybody's an adult until they prove otherwise. And so hopefully that's going to be the case today. Why am I here? The reason I'm here is because my wife is a retired employee of the state of South Carolina. She's a teacher's aide, and she also has a prudential policy that was offered through the state of South Carolina to their state teachers. And this policy, there was a hearing held, I believe in 2011 or 12, where it was decided to not be continued because they couldn't get coverage. And at that time, it was public record that there were about 8,000 or so policyholders under that group policy. I basically have several points I like to make today, and they're pretty simple and pretty straightforward. The first point basically is that I work for a manufacturing company. My background is engineering and accounting, and we have to make decisions about what kind of products we make. We make hardware, and insurance companies sell insurance products, and they have different insurance products. There's workers' comp, there's life, there's all kinds of insurance products, but we don't make all the hardware, we don't make all the hinges in my company. We make decisions. And so the insurance companies made a decision of their own free will to write long-term care policies. I think that's an important point. Nobody told them to do it. They were not forced to do it. They did it of their own free will. Just like in my company, we make decisions of what hinges we're going to make or what products we're going to sell, and some we do and some we don't for different reasons. The second point I like to make is that there are multiple parties involved in these deals, whether it's a group policy or a single policy. There are at least 4 parties. One is the insurance companies themselves, and they have their actuaries. And I think that most people would say that insurance companies, by and large, are fairly experienced and know what they're doing, in general speaking. And actually, I had an agent one time explain to me, ask him the question about actuaries, and we had a very good actuary give a very good presentation about the facts and circumstances as to why we're here today. The math does not work. It's real simple. The math does not work very well. And so I asked him, I said, well, tell me about an insurance actuary. He says, well, they're very smart people that basically just never have a good day. They have always something to worry about. You know, they are professional risk managers, and they just never have a good day because there's always something for them to think about, to worry about that could go wrong. And so they're very smart, and they're very educated, and they're very good at what they do, but sometimes they just don't have a good day. And so the insurance industry is very experienced, and most people agree to that. Second party is the Department of Insurance, and their role is to protect the consumers of this state and also make sure that the insurance companies are qualified at what they do, and also to make sure they got the financial resources to pay the bills when they come due. And the insurance department of this state does a very good job. And I think that's been documented and well documented in almost every insurance line. And I think the citizens of South Carolina should be proud and glad of the work that this group does for us on our behalf. And they have 2 roles. One is to serve the consumers and also to handle and deal with the insurance companies. And as far as I know, they do a very good job. And that's why we're having this meeting here today. And the other point I like to make is that another group is usually an agent or a broker, and this broker or agent could be a direct employee of the insurance companies, if it's an individual policy, or it might be an agent that's representing several lines. And then the fourth and final group is the buyer. And probably in this whole equation, the least knowledgeable and the least educated about insurance is the buyer, not the insurance company, not the state of South Carolina Insurance Department, and not the broker. And so that gets to my next point. And I have here the prudential certificate that was given to my wife who, back in 2009, which happens to be the same year that Mr. McKinnon signed up for the policy. And in it, there is a section that says they do have the right to raise the prices. But they also have a section in there, which they tend to ignore, that says that your basic coverage is going to stay the same. The premium is going to be the same on your coverage. And so apparently that section hadn't been read very well. And I like to make that point. And so the thing that has been happening is the word on the front of this is contract. And to me, there's written contracts and there's verbal contracts. And in my company, it's a manufacturing company, we have contracts. We have purchase orders. We have supply agreements. We have a lot of things where we have to enter into arrangements where we make a deal with another party. And in the world I live in, you know, when things don't go our way, we don't get to go back and change the rules of the game very well. We have to live by what we said we were going to do, you know, at the time that we did it. And we may have made some mistakes, and we may go, oh, gee, I wish I hadn't have done that. But, you know, as I said, we're having an adult conversation here today. And, you know, I was at the beach last week, and I had some grandkids, and when they made mistakes, they wanted the adults to take care of it, you know. But when you grow up and you're an adult and you make a mistake, you pretty well have to take care of your own mistakes and live up to your word. And I just don't know that that's being done in this whole situation as much as it probably should be done. And the last thing I'd like to say is there were some mistakes made, and I only want to ask is who made them? Who made the mistakes? Was it the buyers of the policy that made the mistakes, or was it the insurance companies? And they're talking about what these words say in these contracts, and they say they got the right to raise prices. But you know, I don't see the part where it's guaranteed they make a profit. I miss that part. That's what's not in these arrangements. It doesn't say they're guaranteed to make a profit. And it doesn't say, if I make a mistake, I can come back and be whole. And that's what I'd like to end on today. Thank you.
Okay, as far as I can tell, I have one more consumer that has signed up, and several other people that have signed up, but they will be insurance agents or interested parties, and I think I've got them all covered. Mr. Ledford, Cy Ledford, and if, as Mr. Ledford comes, if, okay, and your name is? Okay, you'll be right after Mr. Ledford, and then have I missed anybody else? Okay, and when this gentleman finishes, we'll take about a 5-minute break and have some refreshments. But Mr. Ledford's all yours.
Okay, I'm a direct person. I get direct to the point. Excuse me. I retired in 2001. In 2001, we bought a long-term care policy. We bought 2 policies, what they call a shared care policy. I have 6 years. My wife had 6 years. I can borrow from her or vice versa. My initial premium with my company was $3,381 in 2001. That's what the premium was. That premium remained in effect until 2009, which was good. In 2009, I had a 14.5% increase. Okay, I can live with that. Okay, the same thing, the policy, let me give you the coverage. I've skipped over that. The coverage was for $120 a day with a 5% inflation clause, which means every year my daily rate goes up 5%. Okay, so we go on down to 2013. 2013, I got a notice from my provider that my premium was going up 75%. 75%. My wife's was going up 68%. Now, had the combined premiums for the two would have gone from $3,459 to $6,416. Okay? You got all those numbers? Good. Now, they did come to me and say, but if you'll drop your 5% inflation clause down to 3.4%, your premium will remain the same. I didn't like it. But from an economic standpoint, I chose to go with 3.4%. Okay, 3.4% remain in effect until 2015. Then they came in and said, we're going to raise your rate again, 41.3%. Now, Mr. Farmer, you made a statement that in the last 5.5 years, you have not granted anything over 20%. My figures dispute that. And these are the facts, and I've got the paperwork at home to back it up. 41.3%.
Which company are we talking about?
You want me to mention names?
Yes, oh, yes,
John
sir.
Hancock.
John, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good,
I've got the paperwork that says that.
good.
So what I do now, because that's going to jack my premiums up again. So I dropped the inflation clause. They locked me in at $215 a day. I can live with that. I don't like it, but I can live with it. So the next year, in 2017, they raised the premium up 20%. They asked for 23, you gave them 20. Okay? These are numbers
No, I
off of my paperwork that I get from John Hancock. These are not made-up figures.
I don't disagree with any.
Okay, so we move on down. Today, I'm paying $3,351. Now, if I accepted all of the rate increases that John Hancock said they wanted without any concessions back to them, my annual premiums today would be $11,000. That's a 225% increase. Do the math. What has inflation been during that time? 36%. That's the overall inflation from 2001 to 2017. That means your dollar that you made in 2001, which I was making the same dollars in 2001 that I'm making today, I would have to make $1.36 today to pay the same bill. Now, I don't know the answer to the question, but I've heard a lot of people in here banging on the insurance companies. I'm not banging on John Hancock. I'm banging on the insurance board department. You're the ones that granted the increases. John Hancock is no different from me going into my boss and saying, I want a 40% raise. And he says, okay. Now, my buddy out here, he goes in and he asks for 5%. And they give him, okay. Like he said, I got a raise, 5%. I said, I did too. I got 40. What'd you get? He said, I only got 5. Why'd you get 5? I said, I asked for mine. You just went in and said you wanted a raise. And you only got 5%. So I don't have a beef with John Hancock. Not at all. The only beef that I have with John Hancock is that their paperwork, you have to read it about 3 times before you can really understand it. The agent who sold me the policy, and this is my fault, phooey on me, didn't give me all the details. He did tell me that your premiums are subject to increase. Well, I mean, I figured that. That's, it's a consumer product. It's going to increase. But there was a couple of things that he left out, like a non-forfeiture. A non-forfeiture means that if I quit paying the premiums today, whatever monies I've put into this fund, which is over $60,000, I would still have that pool of money to work off of. I did not know that until about 5 or 6 years ago when I went to a John Hancock agent in Charlotte and sat down and reviewed all of this. And he said, I see you don't have a non-forfeiture. I said, what is that? And he explained to me. I said, I don't know anything about it. So that's phooey on me. That's my fault. That's not John Hancock's fault. That's not the insurance department's fault. That's my fault. But it would have been nice to have known that, even if it had cost a little more. At least I know that I'm putting my money in a savings account. So that's about all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Ledford. Mr. Cook.
I'm Jerry Cook, and I just retired from 42 years in IT. And in the computer industry, this, what we have here, almost amounts to ransomware, is the way I liken it, because the insurance, the long-term care insurance that my wife and I bought 12 years ago, has embedded itself into our financial system. And now we can't get rid of it. And it's like the insurance companies can ask for whatever they want. It's, okay, you know, they ask for 48%, they only get 20. But it just keeps going on and on. When does it end? That's what I want to know. When does it end? How high will it go up? And maybe it's not like ransomware. It may be more like the SCDOI nuclear fiasco, where they build this thing, but they have no incentive to get it right, because all they can do, or what they can do if it's not right, they can just come back and say, well, let's raise the rates. We didn't need to get it right. That's what bothers me about this, is that it was not done right, and now it's just being passed on to us. And whenever I call, I'm always told that we have options. And these options are to scale back on the coverage, increase the elimination period, or drop the policy. And dropping the policy, they say, oh, and if you do that, they try to sell me on it, is, you know, you'll have this non-forfeiture thing where you will get your premiums back if you ever need long-term care. Well, that's not a good deal. I mean, it would be like me saying to any of you today that you give me $100,000 right now, and I'll hold on to it. And if you ever need long-term care, I'll give you back that $100,000 with no interest, no dividends. I'll just give it back to you. That's no deal. It's not a good option. None of those are good options. But I think it's the insurance company would like that to be what we would do, that we would drop it. Drop it at this point. They walk away. They get, you know, all the money, all the use of the money that we've paid in. And people have made some excellent points up here, and they covered most of my talking points. The one thing I want to cover, the last thing, is the unsustainability of this. My wife and I are paying right now $4,000 a year for 2 long-term care policies. And they have gone through 2 20s and a 12 in the past 4 years. 2 20% increases and a 12%. This is with Genworth. And that breaks down to 13.2% per year. Now, if those rates continue, in 10 years, we'll go from $4,000 to $13,000 a year in premiums. In 20 years, and let me stop here and say, my mom's 95 years old, okay? She still lives on her own, she still drives. You don't want to be behind her, but, you know, she still drives, okay? And so, you know, I hope to live that long. But if I get to age, in 20 years, age 82, it'd be $47,000. And by age 88, this is the compounding that people were talking about. By age 88, I would be paying $100,000 a year in long-term care insurance premiums. It's unsustainable, completely unsustainable. And if I do make it to my mom's age of 95 and keep the same coverage, and it increases 13.2% per year, the premiums would be $239,000 a year. It's the effect of compounding. Albert Einstein said it's the most powerful force in the universe. So we just have to figure out where this is going to end. You know, I'm hoping that what's going to happen is that eventually, our premiums catch up to where this balance thing that we saw in the first thing is going to kick in, and there will be a balance. But when does it happen? I mean, I did write a letter a year and a half ago to Genworth, and they came back with all my options and all this, and yes, it's, you know, we didn't go up on you in particular, we went up on your group and all this stuff. But at the end, it was kind of humorous. They ended by saying that you can trust us, because we've been selling long-term care insurance for 40 years. And I thought, okay, that means when we bought ours 12 years ago, You had 38 years of experience, or 28 years of experience, and you still missed it completely. And, you know, I don't know what the solution is here. I appreciate the Department of Insurance. You know, they're on a tightrope here. They're trying to balance against the consumers paying so much and keeping the companies in business. This lady was right about Genworth and the problems they're having, and the stock has gone down 90%, and they quit paying dividends about 8 years ago. I mean, we don't want the companies to go out of business. That would be, of course, you know, the disaster. But this is completely unsustainable, folks, and I hope we can do something about it here. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Hello. I'm John Galligan. I drove down from Burlington, North Carolina. I bought my policy for my wife and I in 2005 while we lived in South Carolina. We lived in South Carolina a number of years, and the original rate was $32.10 a year for my wife and I with Genworth. It stayed that way for 9 years. And just like the gentleman just stated, 2015, it went up 12.7%. And then last year and this year, it went up 20%. So altogether, I'm saying that our rates have increased 52.7% since 2011. Now, the curious thing about it is when a person does research on the internet, very often they come across these studies and articles written by Genworth to tell what has happened in the long-term care industry. And the ironic thing is that quoting Modern Healthcare Magazine, which has an article in there by Genworth stating that long-term care rates, for the cost rather, have risen 11% since 2011. Okay, and they said the only thing that went down was the in-home health care, but the nursing home, assisted living went up 11%. Well, ours went up 52.7%. So I don't understand how they can sap us with a rate increase for 41% more than what we paid. So I don't want to beat it to death, but I would just like to thank the Department of Insurance, Director Farmer, Joe Cregan, and his staff that put together this forum so that we could air our problems. But just a couple items that jump out about the last few presentations is I'm curious if the Attorney General of South Carolina is following this dilemma that we're in, and is there a case for a class action lawsuit? Another thing that jumps out at me, being from North Carolina, is the situation up there with good old Duke Energy, who polluted our rivers up there with coal ash dumps. And so their solution for correcting the problem of cleaning up the rivers and the coal ash dumps is to have a rate increase and charge it to the consumers. So just like was said previously, I just don't understand how they can pass those costs on to us. So thank you again for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you, Mr. Galligan. Any other consumers that we missed? Yes, sir.
In full disclosure, I'm an insurance agent as well. I'll be speaking for 2-3 minutes in a lot of time. But I'm a consumer as well. I've missed 1 out of every 2 days working this year caring for my dad and my stepmother. In 2000, I made a deal with my dad and my father-in-law. I said, hey, Dad, if you'll pay for your long-term care insurance policy, I'll pay for Mom's. My dad said, yeah, done deal. My father-in-law said, no, that's not something I'm going to do. Well, when my father-in-law passed, and my in-laws were 10 years older than my parents, when my father-in-law passed, they were paying $6,000 a month for home care out of a reverse mortgage to pay for him and Mom. Mom was in, at that point, her 6th year of dementia. After he passed, we moved her in with us, and she spent the last 6 years of her life with us. In the last 4 of those, she didn't walk, talk, or feed herself. You know, I've walked it. Shortly after my mother-in-law passed, my mom, my parents are divorced, lived just a short distance from us and was fiercely independent, even though she was legally blind and deaf. When she had to go into a nursing home, she lived there 2 months short of 4 years. Well, fast forward a few years, 2 years ago, we had to trigger my dad and my stepmother, who will both be 86 next month, their home care policy. This year, it became necessary to move them from home care to a facility, and I moved them from Fayetteville, North Carolina, where my dad retired from the Air Force, down here to Lexington. But we're currently paying $8,100 a month for my dad in skilled care, and in the same facility, we're paying $5,400 a month. I've heard every pocketbook hurting here and everything. I fully understand it. I get it, because it's coming out of my pocket right now in caring for the parents. But I also look at how much is having to be paid. I also look at how much money is being paid out at the end of the day. You know, we're $13,500 a month is being paid to the long-term care facility right now to receive benefits. And my folks have now been on claim for 2 years. And even with the kind of rate increases that y'all have been talking about, in 2 months, my parents will have received every dime that they paid into those policies that they've been paying for 18 years back, and have received all of that back. And had they been in the facility that they're at now, they would have got it a lot quicker than that, because their first 2 years were primarily for home care. But I understand both sides of the issue and everything. I'm walking right now, you know, the caregiver role, you know, in long-term care. Even though we're having to pay that, I've still had to, you know, miss a lot of work caring for my dad. My dad's in the VA hospital, you know, right now. And when you look at the big picture, I was sitting next to one of my coworkers there, and she made a valid point. Out of everybody that was concerned about what they were dealing with, only one of them went back to their agent. Understand, as an agent, we are your advocate. We're there. We're sitting in the bar association here. The attorney, the agent. We're here to be your advocate, to help with those issues, so that you don't have to compromise the coverage that you've had. Yeah, the insurance industry made some big mistakes. I'm with you 100% on that. And as a consumer who owns a long-term care policy, who sold it to my parents, who sold it to my clients, I'm not any more happy with the changes that have happened in the industry than you are. But I am realistic that when we're looking at $150,000 a year being paid out for my folks right now in care, versus the $4,000 or $5,000 a year that they were paying in premium, that's a pretty good return compared to anything else that you buy out there. Your name? My name is Doug Jolly.
Okay, any other consumers? At the department, we've received about 4 letters, mainly emails from consumers that could not be here today. So I'm going to ask Joe Cragen to summarize some of those, and we'll take 2 or 3 minutes to get these in the record. But the folks went to the time and trouble of writing us, so we'll put those in the record, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break.
I'm going to try to read these quickly. These are folks who contacted the department who were not able to attend but had long-term care concerns, and they wanted their information read to the record, as the director said. The first I'm going to read is from a couple, Peter and Beth Eisenberg, and they are from Pawleys Island, South Carolina. These are his statements. My wife and I purchased our long-term care policies in 2005 based on our research, the recommendation of our MetLife representative, as well as our available funds. We chose policies that would cover most of our projected daily expenses. Included in our policies is inflation protection equal to 5% of the benefit amount for the previous year. Together with our modest amount from savings, we felt we were well protected from financial disasters should either or both of us become incapacitated. And then he discusses the premium increases. In 2010, our policy premiums increased 17%, whereas the inflation at that time was 2.7%. In 2014, our policy premiums increased 20%. In the same 4-year period, inflation average was 2.1%. And in 2018, our policy premiums increased another 20%. They conclude with a second 20% policy increase in a 4-year period prompted me to call the South Carolina Department of Insurance to find out what could be done to protect us from these excessive premium increases. It was there I learned that the long-term care insurance companies were seeking increases of more than 40% per year, but the state limited to no more than 20% per year. While the benefits per day have also increased because of the built-in inflation protection, it's barely keeping up with projected daily expenses. My fear, our fear, if changes are not instituted now to control the cost of long-term care insurance, the benefits we signed up for will be outstripped by the ever-escalating premium increases. Thank you for the opportunity to express these concerns. The second letter is from Mr. David Costa, who now resides in St. Mary's, Georgia, but is a former resident of South Carolina, and he is a Genworth policyholder. He says, I'm writing to let you know of my dissatisfaction with Genworth and the recent long-term health insurance premium increases that South Carolina continues to approve each year. Over the past 4 years, our premiums have gone up over 62%. One of the main selling points, while we looked into the policy back in July of 2005, was the fact that premiums had not gone up, and according to our salesman, if they did go up, it would be for a small amount. This is why we were okay with the first increase we received 4 years ago. But now, after a 62% increase, something needs to be done. Genworth is quick to point out that they requested more than 20%, leaving the consumer with the feeling that we should be happy that the increase isn't higher. But after a 62% increase, I have no idea why Genworth still has a problem with their balance sheet. However, I feel they should start to look within their own company for answers and stop passing the problems on to the consumer. Genworth does point out the fact that we could keep our premium the same or lower increase. However, in order to do that, you must lose some or most of the benefits. I believe this is exactly what they would like you to do. Pay your premium year after year until you can no longer afford the premium. And when the time comes that you need those benefits, you no longer have a policy that will cover your required needs, or you no longer have a policy at all. Genworth has all of your money that you've paid them for all these years. If I ran a company like Genworth that I knew all I had to do was get a 20% premium increase, was to ask for 40 to 50%, I would continue to ask for an increase year after year. I request South Carolina's department stop granting the automatic 20% increase to these insurance companies without firm justification. I would also like to see some type of grandfather clause put into place that consumers who have paid their LTC premium would get the premium, he uses quote marks, frozen after a set number of years into the system, say 25 or 30 years of paying into the policy. Being on a fixed income, a 20% increase each year is a big hit to our budget. Thank you for listening to these concerns. The third one is shorter. It is from Ms. Donna Boyder, and she is also a Genworth policyholder. She's from upstate, and she says, my husband and I both have policies with Genworth Insurance, and premiums have increased the last 2 years. We, along with others who have policies, have been paying in for at least 10 years. Senior citizens live on limited incomes. Price increases every year make LTC insurance unaffordable. However, the dilemma is that people who have been paying premiums so long and realize that there is definitely a need will continue to pay. Please be aware of the lack of affordability of long-term care insurance. Thank you in advance. And the final presentation is from Julius Tyndall Jr., who sent a chart which details his increases. He is a John Hancock policyholder, and he says as follows. On April 28, 2003, my wife and I originally submitted LTC applications with USAA, underwritten by John Hancock. And I provided you with additional detail, and he did enclose his additional policy. What he illustrates is that the annual premium at that time was $1,602 for himself and $1,421 for his spouse. That was in 2004. He goes on to say, I specifically questioned the sales representative if these rates were subject to change. His response was, quote, John Hancock has never made a change to an LTC rate, close quote. While this was no written guarantee, it surely implied that we could be confident these prices would remain the same. John Hancock has now raised our premiums and reduced our benefit multiple times in the last 6 years, in one case by 90%. He then provides a chart which indicates his premium currently in 2018, where his annual premium is $1,923 and his spouse is $1,895. And he concludes with, we are severely disappointed in this John Hancock product. Our expectations were that the contracted rates would remain the same. Instead, it continues to change more frequently and significantly without recourse. We have now paid in 14 years of premiums and yet have no idea what surprise may await us the next year. Simply put, this is not right by any measure, and it is our sincere hope that the State Insurance Commissioner will reject any further rate increases for existing John Hancock policyholders. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we take 5 quick minutes? There's still soft drinks and water back here in the back. Please help yourself. And then thank you for Ella. Okay, can you hear me now? All right. If we'll find our seats, we'll pick up with the program. I know. I'm working on the guy in the booth here. All right, can you hear me now? Somebody ought to make a commercial about that. I want to thank each of our consumers that have talked today. It has certainly been helpful. We've learned a lot as well. So we'll enter into the next part of the program. I noticed some companies and some of the staff were talking to folks. If y'all want to continue that, you can do that outside, because this is the good part of this hearing is that we can talk together, and you know, if you have a question of a company, they're here. We're not going to learn anything unless we talk. So, and I appreciate the way that we've approached this afternoon. It's certainly been helpful. So I have 2 more groups that we want to hear from. And the next group is what I've called interested parties. And so I'll introduce each one, and then after one person speaks, just come up and make your comments. So as I said in the beginning, the AARP folks have helped us tremendously putting this together with some of their folks and sending out information. And I certainly appreciate that. And so first we'll hear from Teresa Arnold. Then we have Andy Atkins, elder law attorney that has clients in this space, and he'll make some comments. And then Ashley Hunter, who represents NAFA, the insurance agents that sell this product, will make a brief introduction of a couple of their agents to make limited comments. And then Jerry Dickerson with the Office of Aging in the Lieutenant Governor's Office says he's back there in the back if you have any questions of him later on, that he is available, will not make comments. And then we'll hear from our friends from the industry. So the way I see it, we've got another 45 minutes or an hour. I appreciate your attention and your persistence with us. This is an extremely important subject. And so now, Teresa, will you come and share with us?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hope that break helped a little bit. I just wanted you to know that when I first got here, I ran into a colleague of mine. She is the executive director for the Association of Social Workers in South Carolina. And I asked her, I says, oh, do you have a long-term care policy? And she said, no, I just want to hear more about it. And I said, well, I think you will hear more about it. And halfway through y'all's testimony, I got a text from her, and she said, okay, I think I've heard enough. I'm heading out. And she said, I think we'll have to look at a different option versus long-term care policy. She said, you know, such as selling several kidneys. But anyway, so just a little humor there. And the other thing is, years ago when I first came with ARP, I worked with our national expert on long-term care. And he was speaking at the National Conference of State Legislators about the importance of long-term care and planning for it and long-term care insurance as an option. And when he finished his workshop, I walked up to him afterwards and I said, John, so do you have a long-term care insurance policy? And he said, no, I don't. Well, he was a heavy smoker and he died 2 years later, so maybe he knew something. But just to tell you that it's never been a clear-cut option. But especially, it's not a clear-cut option for those of us like me who didn't plan as well as you guys did. I mean, you all who have testified today are the ones who made the right decisions at the right time. You did everything right. And I understand that that's why you feel so frustrated. And we discussed with that this actually was an opportunity to have a little bit of a peer support group. And before I forget, I do want to let you know that I have my colleague here, Nikki Hutchinson. If you are interested in learning more about what we might be able to do to rectify the situation going forward, I don't know that there's anything we can do going back, but there may be some protections that we can advocate for going forward for long-term care policies. And Nikki is happy to take your name and information if you'd like us to get back with you. I have worked on a task force that made 30 some odd recommendations for how we can improve our long-term care system. And looking at long-term care insurance and making sure there are protections for people through long-term care insurance was one of those recommendations. I see that based on what I'm hearing, and based on things that no one could have predicted, no one could have predicted that in 2008, the entire economy of the world would become so devastated the way it was, nor could anyone have guessed that how many years out the interest rates would have stayed incredibly low to flat for so long. So I understand that there's some issues there. But with AARP, we do have policies that are suggested for states and federal government that says, these are some things you should do to protect consumers. And I'm going to go over some of those. And I also want you to know, I will stay here until after this is over. If there are questions that you would like me to ask of our national experts, I don't have the answers. I am not an expert on this. But I am happy to take that information down. And in fact, I already have taken down the class action lawsuit question. I want to ask that of our national folks to find out, has any group of folks ever tried to do a class action lawsuit? I'm just going to find out what's going on with that. I also want to know, because I didn't see it in here, the percentage of a premium. What is the standard for the percentage of a premium that should go to a reserve? How much should it be? And the only reason I know to ask that is because on health insurance premiums, sometimes before the Affordable Care Act, companies didn't really have to meet a certain percentage of premium going to benefit. So in South Carolina, one. Well, I guess my point is I just learned at that time that there were sometimes premiums that like 67% of your benefit, your premium only had to go to benefit or something like that. It increased that. Regardless, it's just a question that I have. So I did provide this information. I don't know that everybody got it. So this is the Understanding Long-Term Care Insurance. This may not really be helpful for you all because most of y'all already have a policy, but I do have information. It does explain things. One thing that I will indicate is that less than 10% of long-term services and support expenditures are paid for by long-term care insurance. So out there, for those who kept their policies, it's only about 10% of all expenditures that are covered by people who had the foresight to purchase a policy a long time ago. What we would recommend is that we have a stricter standardization of long-term care policy models, that we not have tons of different models, which makes it really difficult for a consumer to compare the product across insurance companies. So we just say standardization, so you have a good selection of models. Another one is to give the policyholder, and it sounds like y'all did have this, a contractual right to reduce the amount or duration of benefits in any combination if premiums are going up. It says here that it's critical that agents who sell long-term care insurance be properly trained and aware of the product so that you have that kind of, they have the right information when you ask questions. Clearly, I heard several times here that people ask the agent, will my premiums stay the same? And they were told, yes. That's what it sounds like to me. We do have a national clearinghouse for long-term care information, which may be helpful. Also, we think that there should be reporting for consumers to have access, for instance, on the website at the Department of Insurance, that would help you to compare insurance companies, policies, benefits, including historical information on premiums, so that it would be specific to the state and to the company. Let's see if I've already covered that. Strong consumer protection standards should be put in place along with very strong regulatory oversight to protect long-term care insurance purchasers from inadequate policies, overly restrictive benefit triggers, and abusive sales practices. We should, as state government, should monitor the marketplace, ensure adherence to regulatory standards, vigorously enforce those standards, including through monetary penalties should infractions or abuses occur. Policyholders should be insured a non-forfeiture benefit if their premiums increase beyond a certain level. So I have a series of things here. I have copies of this. What I do want to pledge to you, which probably I had not considered prior to this hearing, is that I would like to work with our legislators to see if we need, and the Department of Insurance, to see if we need to look at some of the consumer protections that are in place now. Are they not strong enough? Is there some more things that we need to do to protect consumers? I will tell you that having just come off of a multi-year battle with SCE&G and their rate hike, I'm ready for another one. So thank y'all very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andy Atkins. I'm an attorney in private practice in Columbia with a firm called Millender Elder Law. Thank you, Director Farmer, and thank you, Joe Cregan, for inviting me. Joe contacted the South Carolina Bar to ask for a volunteer to come speak at this, and I was happy to do it. I told Joe that I could probably do this for maybe 10 minutes or so intelligently. Beyond that, all bets are off, but I'll do my best. I should also mention I'm only here as a private attorney. I'm not here representing the bar or anybody else, just me. What I want to do in my time is talk a bit about elder law, which is a type of law that we do, and about long-term care from a legal or planning perspective. To explain how attorneys in our practice areas view long-term care insurance and how it fits into the planning that we do. Now, I'm only going to give some background information about this type of planning, a general overview of long-term care planning. Other discussions about dollars and cents of long-term care insurance, that'll have to come from other folks who are more knowledgeable than me about it. I should also mention that just from reading the room a little bit, there seems to be some dissatisfaction with long-term care insurance. I'll also mention that I'm not a litigator, and the firm that I'm with doesn't do any litigation, so To make an analogy, if you have a heart condition, you should go to a cardiologist. You wouldn't go to a dermatologist. So those kind of questions, I'm probably not the best person to ask. As I mentioned, our firm specializes in elder law. Elder law is a practice area that may be best defined by the types of clients that we see: seniors, people with special needs, and their families. It's a relatively new area of the law that started to emerge around the 1980s as attorneys began to realize that the issues that seniors and people with special needs faced maybe aren't quite addressed by other areas of the law. Elder law is a practice area that touches on many other practice areas like estate planning and guardianships and probate and litigation. But it might be the one area of the law that most people will have some contact with at some point in their lives because it deals with issues that are pretty universal. You might not find yourself with a need for a criminal defense attorney. You might not find yourself caught up in a lawsuit, but any one of us could become incapacitated at any time for any reason. And it's a good idea for all of us to plan for the future as best we can. Those are the kind of things that elder law attorneys deal with on a regular basis. What we're mainly concerned with today is long-term care planning. Now, not all attorneys engage in long-term care planning, just as not all of them do litigation or guardianships or other areas. Now, with long-term care planning, we're trying to determine how to access the care a person needs, whether it be in-home care or assisted living or nursing home care, how to pay for that care, and if there are any ways as possible to preserve some of their assets. Long-term care planning is extremely expensive, as I'm sure you all know. The South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services puts out a figure once a year, the average cost of nursing home care in South Carolina, which is an important figure used in Medicaid eligibility purposes, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. This year, DHHS says that the average monthly cost of nursing home care in South Carolina is $6,866.26. We had a little confusion earlier this year when the number that DHHS initially released was actually slightly lower than the 2017 figure. None of us can fathom how nursing home care would have gone down from the previous year, and sure enough, they went back and looked at it, and they revised the figure upwards to $6,866.26. Another source for the high cost of care, the high cost of long-term care, is Genworth's annual cost of care survey. Nationally, they pegged the cost of a private room at nursing home in 2017 at $8,121. To put it in another perspective, for planning purposes, when we meet with clients, we usually have to come up with some kind of round number for planning purposes to try to figure out how much care is going to cost. Last year, we usually rounded off to about $7,000 per month. This year, it's more like $8,000 per month or higher. Assisted living costs are no picnic either. Those can even go as high as skilled nursing costs or even higher. And in-home care is also not so pretty. So the big question for us is, how does one pay for long-term care? Well, there are a couple ways you can do it. You can pay it privately, you can qualify for Medicaid, or you can purchase long-term care insurance. I think we'd all like to be in the category of being able to pay for our care privately. Depending on the level of care needed, some folks can pay for maybe a few months or a few years, but the vast majority of us can't do it indefinitely. So instead, Medicaid is the primary payor for most people for long-term care costs. Medicaid is administered jointly by the federal and state government. In South Carolina, DHHS is a state government agency that handles Medicaid. The federal government pays about 70% of Medicaid costs in South Carolina. Medicaid is needs-based. That is, in addition to the level of care requirements, a person must also have a financial need for Medicaid. To qualify for Medicaid, a person has to meet certain financial criteria, and they have to require intermediate or skilled nursing level of care. If a person meets the criteria, Medicaid helps pay for nursing home care and also some home health care. But one thing it does not pay for is assisted living, except for in very rare circumstances, I think. For Medicaid eligibility in South Carolina, a person must have monthly income of no more than $2,250 in 2018. Certain assets or resources are exempt from Medicaid eligibility purposes, such as a person's primary residence, a vehicle, personal effects, and reasonable prepaid funeral expenses. Otherwise, other countable assets have to be below $2,000. If a person is married, the community spouse or the healthy spouse, the one who's not applying for Medicaid, can additionally keep $66,480 of countable resources. But then we have the third category of paying for long-term care, and that's the one we're all here for, long-term care insurance. Long-term care insurance is an alternative to paying for costs out of pocket or qualifying for Medicaid. Now, from a planning perspective, I think the key advantage with long-term care insurance is the flexibility it can provide. For instance, I mentioned just now that Medicaid doesn't generally pay for assisted living. With long-term care insurance, some policies may cover things that Medicaid doesn't, in different settings that Medicaid doesn't cover, like assisted living or adult daycare, as well as at home or in a nursing home. So ideally, you'd want to have a policy that's as broad as possible to cover as many settings as possible. Now, when some clients come to our office, they might be in the midst of a crisis. Maybe this person had an accident at home, they broke a hip, they've been to the hospital, then they've been to rehab. They may be getting skilled nursing coverage for a little while under Medicare, but for a very limited amount of time. So now this person needs care and they can't go back home. For those kind of clients, if they have long-term care insurance, we're trying to look to how to make it go into payout mode as quickly as possible. But if they don't, then we're probably looking to try to qualify for them for Medicaid as quickly as possible. Other times we see clients who aren't in a crisis. Maybe this person has some health issues, but they're managing at home all right. They're able to do most of their daily needs and maybe drive themselves around to the grocery store, to doctor's appointments. For that type of person, we might be looking for care maybe 5 or more years down the road. We'd really look at making sure they have important documents in place, like a durable power of attorney, a health care power of attorney, and a will. And that's true for all the clients, if possible, to make sure they have those important documents in place. We want to make sure that power of attorney has important powers in it that might be useful for future long-term care planning needs. We'll discuss what options they might have if they have long-term care insurance, but for the most part, for these types of clients, there may not be much to do in the near term, except for maybe getting their documents in place. But then there are some clients who are in between the two extremes. They may have some health issues, but they're not in a crisis situation. They may be experiencing a gradual decline and could benefit from some assistance, but skilled nursing care isn't needed now and might not be needed for a couple of years. So for those type of clients, we can see how long-term care insurance can provide a lot of flexibility. Their long-term care insurance plus their income might pay for a few extra hours of help in the home, which might allow that person to stay at home longer, and might give someone a much-needed break, like a family caregiver. It might also allow them to preserve some more of their assets. It might be enough to help pay for an assisted living, which might be a more appropriate setting, or if they have their eye on a particular facility, it might be enough to cover that cost. So for elder law attorneys, long-term care insurance can be a valuable tool for planning purposes. When clients come to us for long-term care planning, we try to gather a lot of information from them. We try to get a copy of the policy if they have one. We try to look at it to see what its terms are, what sort of elimination period it has, what its daily rate is. They're telling me I'm running short on time, so I'll try to wrap this up quickly. In many cases, by the time a client comes to us, if they don't already have long-term care insurance, chances are their health is such that they probably wouldn't be able to qualify for a policy. Sometimes if the clients are a married couple, one spouse is healthy and the other spouse is ill, the healthy spouse might be able to qualify, but the ill spouse maybe cannot. And of course, there's the elephant in the room, cost, and where to find it. From our perspective, long-term care insurance can be a useful tool for planning purposes, and as we know, long-term care costs are high and they aren't getting any cheaper. On the other hand, we've all heard today that long-term care insurance costs are high and they aren't getting any cheaper. So that's about the extent of what I can say about long-term care insurance before falling off a cliff of speaking intelligently. So I'll stick around a little longer afterwards if anyone wants to ask any questions. But that class action lawsuit question, that's going to have to go to somebody else.
I'm Bruce Pope with Northwestern Mutual and the National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors here in the state of South Carolina. I have been a financial advisor with Northwestern Mutual for 31 years. My cohort, Steve Leslie, for 41 years, and Doug Jolly, who you heard from earlier, 29 years. We're here just to give some perspective today from our vantage point, as we're on the front lines working with you, the consumers that we've heard from today, to educate and help keep informed of the various resources that are available to take care of long-term care financial security. The National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors is the largest and oldest professional association in our planning space, and it's our effort to advocate for our members and the people that we serve here in South Carolina to make sure that their financial security, whether it's individual or for their businesses, is sound, and we educate people as to the various ways that they can do that based on their goals and objectives. There are several things to mention in that we train each other, we educate each other. We are required and mandated by the State Department of Insurance to have continuing CE. One of those requirements is a 4 hours not ethics, we do 3 hours of ethics is mandated, but 4 hours of long-term care insurance planning every 2 years. And so every individual that's licensed in this state to sell or provide long-term care services has to meet that standard or they're kicked out. That's a good thing. We want you to continue to do that because that helps them serve the citizen better. And we want to get better. And it sounds like some of the messages that we heard that some individuals may not have been clear or it was unheard or whatever it was, but we need to continue to challenge everybody to raise the bar, to educate the consumer, to make sure they stay informed, and not that it's just a transaction. This is based on a relationship founded on trust, and trust requires time, and so we want to see and visit again to say, here's what's going on, let me tell the story of where things are, what's going on in your life. We need to hear that back. Also, we advocate for people like in the senior citizen arena. NAFA just helped to push through federal legislation that took a number of years to push through called the Senior Citizen Protection Act that President Trump recently signed this past month. And that's so we can protect the senior citizens out there from many abuse situations, and that we don't have to be handcuffed if we can recognize that and take care of that. All this is kind of commingled into our conversation. My office produces about 1,100 financial plans each year. My goal in 5 years is to be producing 2,000 financial plans, and we try to meet with individuals, couples, business owners to help understand their goals and objectives and build comprehensive financial plans and see how, as we're talking about long-term care, how does that fit in to your plan as we're moving based on your goals and objectives, and how does that interact with all the different resources and silos of money, whether it be Social Security, pensions, whatever it is. All those things have different moving parts, and we can track that and plan accordingly based on what life detours serve each individual, because things will change, and we know that. Planning is evolutionary, and I think that is very important to know, is continuously go back and look at that. When you look at the Apollo rocket that went to the moon and it took off from Cape Canaveral, it made over 400 navigational changes before it hit its target of orbit. And they didn't do it by themselves. It took a whole big ground crew at Cape Canaveral. It took a big ground crew at Houston Control. All those people were tweaking switches. That's what we're doing. The Department of Insurance, our actuaries, ARP, everybody is here working together, and we're commingling our resources to try to advocate for the consumer to keep them safe. There are several other things that we want to speak to, and I'm going to ask Steve Leslie to come and share with us a little bit, and then Doug's going to share from his perspective.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you again for allowing us to be here to talk with you today. Bruce was pretty close. I've been in the business 44 years. Yeah, I know. I started when I was 5, but you know, and I'm an independent agent. So Bruce didn't mention it, but he works for Northwestern Mutual, a quiet company, and he was quiet about it. And I was telling him back there, I was glad to hear from Bruce's perspective that Northwestern Mutual Life was not one of the ones that was a company of concern. And one of the reasons is the training that agents get. And another reason is that Bruce and I and all of those are members of NAFA, and we work by a code of ethics that although we have to put our business through a company, we don't work for the insurance companies. We work for our clients. We work for you. So we've heard a lot about the cost of care. We've heard a lot about the increasing premiums that are coming and continue to come. And we'll hear from the companies in a minute. They'll tell their side. But I'd like to address a different issue. Most of you here from the public are here because you've got long-term care products and the prices are increasing. What we need is more awareness in the public. Maybe your peers or your children need to know about long-term care. We need to get the message out that there are alternatives, and there are a lot more alternatives out there than the traditional products. So one of the things that we would like to propose is the expansion of the partnership plans. Many of those that I tried to take some notes of how long you've had insurance policies, many of you, most of you, bought your plans before that was even in existence. That came about in 2009, implemented in 2009 as a result of the Deficit Reduction Act that was passed in 2006. That allowed for those qualifying plans. An individual could have, if they had long-term care, and use long-term care up to, say, $200,000, it allowed them to pass $200,000 of assets to their heirs without being recaptured from long-term care. And I think the statistic was made that about 70% of the cost of care comes from Medicare and Medicaid. Well, we all know as an aging population, that's a big strain on our budgets. So everything that we can do to reduce that care, to reduce that cost and the dependence on Medicaid will help all of the rest of us. So, you know, we all hear back to the awareness. We have the public service announcements that you should wear your seatbelts. You shouldn't drink and drive. You shouldn't text and drive. So maybe the public needs to know that don't get old without plans for long-term care. So thank you again for being here. We appreciate it, and we look forward to working with the insurance department on these matters. Thanks. And I'll turn it over to Doug.
I'll be quick. I was privileged 16 years ago to work with our then person sitting in Mr. Farmer's chair to get the South Carolina Long-Term Care Partnership Act as it now exists from the model legislation that had been passed in other states to become part of our state as well. But the industry has changed a great deal during that time. We've all heard in ways. And the products that have been available in the marketplace, as Mr. Farmer had suggested earlier, The vast majority, when I sit down with my clients and I talk about retirement planning, I talk about long-term care as the first issue to make sure that they've got that covered. But more and more people are not choosing the traditional long-term care insurance policies, as Ray had referenced. You know, they're choosing hybrid policies that are life insurance, et cetera. And we need to address the fact that the legislation has not kept up with the changes in the industry, that if somebody is using long-term, their life insurance and paying primarily similar dollars to protect themselves from long-term care, that be addressed so that those can also be partnership plans. Also, it can be significantly less expensive and a much better environment for the person receiving care to receive home care than to be forced into facility care. And currently, the way it works under the partnership plan is once you have exhausted your long-term care insurance benefits and the state steps in to provide the benefit, if you have that, then you only have one choice. You have to go to a facility. And other states have begun to look at home care being something that they're looking at because it can be less expensive and less of a burden on the state Medicaid system. You know, California found it wasn't true, but Minnesota found in their numbers it works. So I'd love to sit down and look and see what we can look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Farmer. My name is Chuck Piacentini. I'm from the American Council of Life Insurers. We're the trade association that represents over 290 life insurance companies, the vast majority of whom provide long-term care benefits. You're not here to listen to me today. I do want to turn it over to members of the industry, but I did also want to offer the fact that if your company is not represented, feel free to talk to me. I'll be here for as long as it takes to address any concerns or to get you connected to the right company, folks. Director Farmer asked us here today to talk at an industry level. So the individuals here have been asked to address the concerns from the industry perspective in a way that takes kind of the companies out of the mix. So the opinions that they express may be a little bit different from company to company, but as Director Farmer has indicated, and many of you have realized, these representatives are here to listen to you, to get your information. If they can't answer your questions, to get you the right people who can answer the questions. But I also want to, follow up on some of the things that were said earlier in this conversation. This is a difficult problem. This is a product that is relatively new. And when the actuaries who built this product, these products, and when the state regulators that evaluated the pricing for these products, they used the best available assumptions that they had at the time. Unfortunately, many of the assumptions that were built turned out to be wrong. In hindsight, that the pricing assumptions that were built for these products were not sufficient to provide premiums that would cover the claims of those individuals for as long as they have experience. So it's a difficult problem that the industry is committed to working not only with the departments of insurance, but to attend forums like this, to hear from consumers, to do what we can to mitigate the problem, to try and find a solution, but we recognize that there's not an easy solution, and we applaud the members of the audience here who've taken responsible steps to provide themselves with long-term care coverage. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul from Prudential, who will introduce himself and talk about the value of long-term care.
Thanks. So my name is Paul Colasanto from Prudential. I'm in charge of the pricing there, which in this context essentially means rate increases. Sorry. Is this better or no? No? There we go. Okay, I'll try this. My name is Paul Colasanto from Prudential. I head the pricing at Prudential, which in this context means the rate increases. But I want to step back from that a little bit and speak about the value of the long-term care coverage that most in the room here have purchased over the years. If you step back from the rate increases that you've seen and the premium itself, the value of the product, if you look at it from the policyholder perspective, I think there's three main values. The one is it's a cost-effective way to pay for care. I don't want to duplicate too much of what's been said, but there have been some examples of people who've said that they've been in situations where people are paying $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a month. And when you look at the cost of the insurance, in many cases, it's sort of like a car insurance. You're paying a couple $100 a month. You're hoping to never use that coverage. But if you do, and it's saving you $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a month, that's a really strong value of return for those people that use the policy. There's a flexibility with the product as well. It was mentioned, I think, by Andy about ALFs might not be covered by a Medicaid, whereas you have your choice of most providers who will accept the insurance, but maybe won't accept Medicaid. So you have more choices of your location of receiving care. I think just a general peace of mind. So knowing that your assets are more protected by having coverage, that you can give more assets to your heirs, I think is an important aspect. I think a lot of people worry about running through their assets and running out of money before they're gone. This helps protect against that. And just the idea of not feeling like you need to rely on family or friends to help. So knowing there's something in place to help you when you need it, I think is a big add to the peace of mind of policyholders and help them feel comfortable with the situation that they have, with not putting others at a disadvantage in terms of their own responsibilities. From the family perspective, I think the same type of thing. So you know that mom and dad are going to be well cared for. You have a little bit less kind of need to be there on a daily basis to take care of them when you know they're getting the care that they want and deserve. And just knowing that they have the flexibility around which setting to go in, the choice of the homes that they're in or the care that they're getting, I think is very important. And knowing that the care they receive is as good or better than they could get with Medicaid. So they're getting the best care, they have the most choices and options, and it just helps the peace of mind. So when you go to visit mom and dad, you can visit them on a social level. You can go sit with them. How are you doing? What's new? Tell them a funny story about the kids. You're not there checking on them, making sure they're okay. You have a little bit of the ability to step back and keep the relationship the way you'd want it to. I think there's a lot of value in that from a non-financial perspective, just from a well-being of the parent and the child. And then from the South Carolina perspective, obviously, it was touched on by Andy also, the Medicaid aspect of this. So if you're covered by your own policy, it keeps your coverage from needing to be paid for by the department or by Medicaid and allows there to be more funds there for other social programs that are really important. So I know we're short on time, but I wanted to just kind of reset us back to the point of when people bought their policies. Why did they buy them? I think these are all really important things to consider. And so the premium is a very, very big part of it from everyone's perspective, I understand. But the value that you bought, all of those things still exist. It's the relativity between the premium and the value might not be the same, but the actual value itself, I think, is really, really still there. So I'll end it at that if anyone has anything else they want to chime in on that front, but I want to be fairly quick in consideration of time.
Thank you, Paul. Jonathan, you want to talk about the regulatory scheme for long-term care?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So just quick introduction. My name is Jonathan Trend. I'm a vice president and actuary with Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. I'm responsible for our long-term care product line, and obviously happy to join the rest of my colleagues up here at this forum. I'd like to talk a little bit, as Chuck said, about the regulatory framework that governs really the product chassis and the pricing thereof. It's kind of the foundation for some of the issues that have been discussed previously. Yeah, the first topic really is this idea of guaranteed renewable. MetLife's policies are issued as guaranteed renewable. And really what that means is that policyholders have a right to continue their policies as long as they continue to pay their premiums. The insurance company cannot change any of the benefit provisions unilaterally. The policyholders need to provide consent for any benefit changes. But as you all know, premiums can change on a class basis, subject to regulatory approval. And so because of that process, all the carriers have to file proposed rate increases, in this case with the South Carolina Department of Insurance and other regulatory bodies throughout the country to receive approval for those rates before they can implement anything. So that's kind of what guaranteed renewable means and is disclosed in our contracts. And then the other two topics I just want to hit on were the regulatory frameworks around premium rates. So the first framework is typically referred to as minimum loss ratio. And for policies that were issued prior to 2010, which I think covered most of the folks in this room, South Carolina and most other jurisdictions regulated long-term care premiums through this minimum loss ratio requirement. And really just to keep it simple, the loss ratio is defined as the ratio of the claims paid, so the monies paid out in terms of benefits, divided by the premiums which are collected over time. As we saw in the SOA presentation, claims early on after purchase and earlier in life are pretty low, and then obviously rise over time as a business ages. And so because of this loss ratio definition is defined over the lifetime of a policy. And typically the requirement here in South Carolina and much of the country has a 60% minimum loss ratio. So really what that means is 60 cents out of every dollar needs to be returned to policyholders in the form of benefits. The second regulatory framework was adopted in South Carolina in May of 2010. Policies issued after that date were subject to what's typically referred to as a rate stability regime. The South Carolina adopted the NAIC model regulation going forward. And basically it says that rather than use this 60% minimum loss ratio formula, it really requires the pricing actuary at the company to certify to a statement. And I'll read to you, this is not quite a verbatim, but close enough. They have to make a statement that the initial premium rate schedule is sufficient to cover anticipated costs under moderately adverse experience, and that the premium rate schedule is reasonably expected to be sustainable over the life of the form with no future premium increases anticipated. So obviously that's not a promise that they won't, it's an anticipation. And that kind of put the onus on the pricing actuary to make that opinion and for the regulatory bodies to approve that. Rate increases under the rate stability framework do have a loss ratio component, typically referred to as the 58-85 rule. And in essence, it says that the rate increase portion of your premium, 85 cents rather than 60, 85 cents of every rate increase dollar must be returned to the consumers in the form of benefits. So it raises that minimum threshold significantly. That's really all I wanted to cover in terms of how the premiums are regulated. And again, thanks for having us here today.
Thanks, Jonathan. And that's pretty technical, but it does address some of the comments that were made earlier about how many dollars of monies that you individuals spend go back to the benefits that are going to be paid either to you or other policyholders. So it's an important piece of the questions that have been asked earlier. Greg, do you want to next talk about some of the background around long-term care pricing?
Sure, Chuck. When LTC products were first developed, companies had very limited data on which to base their assumptions. We talked about that a little bit. earlier, they didn't really have any data of their own. Maybe if they had a related product, especially on the health side, they might have a little bit. But even the industry data was very limited initially. And the first sets of data were developed from public, non-insured information. And then companies typically added margins and case experience was worse than anticipated. And as policyholders filed claims and companies gathered claim experience, it was very limited still if they just looked at the data that they had on their own. So the Society of Actuaries started formal industry studies of insured data to kind of aggregate all the information from all the major companies that were in the market at that time. Initially, those studies really only had data, though, for the younger ages and the early policy duration, so it had to continue to be supplemented with non-insured population data. So there was, at the time, and continues to be, this process where the companies gather information, it gets aggregated with industry data, and the larger companies now are getting more significant amounts of data, but in general, companies need to look at their business nationwide just to have any level of credibility in the data, meaning having enough data to really rely on it for pricing purposes. So that's the data that's available to determine the premiums needed to cover benefits and expenses for the product line. And that, by the way, is why the guaranteed renewability that Jonathan talked about is so important. That provides some balance both for consumers and for the companies. From the company side, the adjustable premiums allow companies to get into these businesses where there isn't much data and there are a lot of unknowns. And from the consumer side, it allows consumers to retain their coverage over time as long as premiums are paid. But now we're in a position where rate increases are necessary just to stabilize the long-term care product lines of most LTC companies. And people are living longer, keeping their policies longer. They're getting to those ages where the claims occur. And those claims are often lasting longer than originally anticipated. And in this low interest rate environment, we have no extra earnings on our investments to help make up for the higher benefits that are being paid. And carriers want to be there for policyholders and to provide them benefits in their time of need. But ultimately, each product line needs to have the financial resources to cover the benefits and expenses, not just now, but literally decades into the future. Otherwise, customers whose premiums are less than needed to cover their costs will be subsidized by other customers, and those customers will end up paying premiums that are higher than what's needed for the benefits they're receiving. And if companies aren't allowed to charge premiums that cover the cost for existing policies for a product line, they'll have little incentive to continue selling new policies for that product, and consumer options will become more limited. And I think it's important to note, that companies are sharing in some of the burden of the increased costs. Provisions already exist so that companies can't go back and recoup or make up for past losses. And there are also provisions being developed to help address small legacy blocks of business and very large rate increases that are out there. But right now, states are kind of going in their own direction on these and many other issues, including how they evaluate and approve LTC rate increases in general. And everybody, companies, state insurance departments, and consumers would be well served by a more stable regulatory environment, one that provides a uniform, meaningful national approach to LTC rate increases. And on a final note, when a state caps a rate increase request, it makes it very difficult for a company to effectively communicate with policyholders. Some states might approve the full amount of a rate increase, but ask that it be implemented in 2 or even 3 years. In that way, a company can at least effectively communicate what the total increase will be and how it will be implemented. With a state that caps increases, it makes it very difficult to effectively communicate the timing and size of any further increases.
Thank you, Greg. Marie, can you talk about various mitigation options that have been developed for consumers facing rate increases so that they can keep their coverage in place?
Absolutely. First, thank you, Director Farmer and your team, for allowing us the opportunity to be here today. Can folks hear me okay? All right. And we're also appreciative of all the South Carolinians who are in attendance today. My name is Marie Roach, and I'm Assistant Vice President of Long-Term Care Government Relations at John Hancock. And as Chuck indicated, I would like to address the mitigation options that are available to consumers. We in industry recognize that premium increases are very difficult for many of our policyholders to afford, and therefore we've taken steps to try and ease that burden on our insureds. So what is a mitigation option? You heard about some discussion of those already, but generally a mitigation option is a benefit reduction that reduces or alleviates the need for a rate increase. We know that our customers value their coverage and continue it in force, meaning the vast majority of our policyholders do not lapse. Thus, the goal of a mitigation option is to keep an individual's new premium as close to their current premium as possible. Generally, the most common mitigation options that you'll see today include reducing of the daily or monthly benefit, lengthening the elimination period, shortening the benefit period, or dropping optional riders. In addition, some carriers offer what has come to be known as the Inflation Reduction Landing Spot. Until recently, probably actually within the last 10 years, most policies included 5% compound or 5% simple inflation. What the landing spot does is offset the rate increase for those with automatic inflation increases by lowering the future index, inflation index prospectively for future inflation increases. So for example, if you had 5% compound inflation, that would be lowered to 4% or maybe 2% based upon the size of the rate increase to be offset. And traditionally, past inflation accruals, meaning everything that you had increased because of the operation naturally of inflation, would be retained. It's important to note that each carrier determines what mitigation options are most appropriate for their consumers. Not all carriers offer the same mitigation options, and there may be variations to what I've just described. Also, certain mitigation options may not be available based upon the parameters of the rate increase itself, or if a rate increase is not approved in full. Also, in addition to the mitigation options, what goes on behind the scenes is some carriers have applied the more restrictive NAIC rate stabilization rules to all policies, including those on a pre-rate stabilization block. Finally, carriers may also offer eligible policyholders who meet certain regulatory thresholds the opportunity to elect what is known as a contingent not-forfeiture benefit. Essentially, if a policyholder chooses to cancel their policy within 120 days of a rate increase, he or she will receive a paid-up policy where no future premiums are due, and a new reduced policy limit is created, or lifetime maximum benefit amount, which is equal to the greater of the sum of premiums paid, or 30 times the current amount of the nursing home daily benefit. But exercising this option will significantly reduce policy benefits, so careful consideration should be given before ever electing it. In summary, the mitigation options have been developed to help our customers retain their valuable coverage so they don't have to lapse and get no or little value from their policies. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamala.
Thanks, Marie. Jamala, you want to talk about communication with consumers and general customer service around long-term care rate increases and more generally?
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Marie. My name is Jamala Marie Arland, and I'm a Vice President and Actuary at Genworth in our long-term care management area. I'm also the Secretary and Treasurer of the Society of Actuaries Long-Term Care Section Council and an active member of the American Academy of Actuaries Long-Term Care Reform Subcommittee. Faced with rate increases, policyholders are encouraged to reach out to their insurer and ask for assistance to determine what options are available to them. The industry understands that the large premium rate increases are a tremendous burden to our policyholders because we talk to our customers every day. In fact, more than 235,000 policyholders have called Genworth to discuss their premium rate increases over the last 2 years. Many companies have service representatives to help policyholders understand their options so they can determine the best course of action for their individual situation. At Genworth, we have a dedicated team of over 40 specially trained customer service representatives who only take calls related to rate increases, and they are ready and willing to help each policyholder understand their options. The vast majority of those conversations will lead to options where the long-term care policyholder keeps their policy in place. Additionally, the industry has very low customer complaint ratios even when faced with significant rate increases, in large part because we work with our policyholders and provide them with alternatives to enable them to find a solution that best fits their circumstances. The industry is committed to being here for policyholders when they need us most, to be available to provide the answers they need and pay eligible claims should those needs arise. As a long-term care professional, a long-term care policyholder, power of attorney to aging grandparents, and advice giver to my in-laws who've been faced with long-term care rate increases, this means a lot to me. Through 2017, Genworth has paid over 260,000 claims for over $16 billion to our policyholders for eligible long-term care claims. In closing, I'd like to share a comment we received from the daughter of a customer who recently passed. She shared this about her mother's experience with Genworth. I want you to know that Genworth has been phenomenal to work with through these years. I can't even remember how long this claim started, but it's been well over 5 years. I'm the one who has dealt with you since we filed the claim. She was a very smart woman to buy that policy when she did, because it made her end of life so much better with the quality of care she received. Ultimately, the industry is committed to maintaining our claims paying ability and keeping our promises to our customers. But unfortunately, that requires actuarially based justified premium rate increases or equivalent policy adjustments to enable the premiums to cover the claims. Director Farmer, we appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's hearing, and we're happy to take questions from you or members of your staff or meet with our policyholders after. Thank you.
Thank you. In closing, I'd just like to thank Director Farmer, not only for his leadership in the state of South Carolina, but for his leadership at the NEIC in working with industry, working with consumers, to find solutions to not necessarily completely solve this problem, but to mitigate and find a solution that enables us to stabilize both the industry and to ensure that the products that you folks very wisely purchased are there to deliver the protection that you may need at some point in the future. And that's, as you've heard, the industry is sharing in the pain. There is no incentive for the industry to have underpriced these products. It is something that we are committed to trying to solve, and we really appreciate forums like this where we get to hear directly from you, the consumers, and work with professionals like Director Farmer and Joe Cregan and the rest of the staff here at the DOI. Thank you.
How about keeping your seats just for a minute or two? I didn't catch everybody's name and company when we went through, so if you would just speak so we'll have it identified for the record, and we may have one question.
Sure. I'm Chuck Piacentini from the American Council of Life Insurers.
Paul Colasanto from Prudential.
Jonathan Trend, MetLife.
Greg Ehrlich, Vice President and Actuary with Northwestern Mutual in Milwaukee.
Marie Roach, John Hancock.
Jamala Murray Arland from Genworth.
Okay, thank you very much. Sir, do you have one question? I told the staff early on that I'd be the only one asking questions today, but we've got time for one. Go right ahead.
Do you have a target that you're, especially for Leif and Genworth, do you have a target of where our premiums would go before these increases stop? Is it
Is it something that, if these 20% raises continue, you ask for 48%, would that be enough, or do you have a target where these things are going to level off, or should we expect them to just continue at high rates indefinitely?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Cook. Like Greg Gerlich, he mentioned when he spoke about how experience emerges over time. One of the ways I like to describe it when I talk about how the industry has learned and what we've learned over time is that, on average, a policy is purchased, the average age of a policyholder is usually in the late 50s, early 60s when they purchase their policy. The average age of claim is in the mid to late 80s. So that's a 25-year period. This product is very young. 40 years may seem like a long time, but from an insurance perspective, it's a very short period of time. So just the runway from the time that somebody purchases a policy to the time that they're expected to go on claim is 25 years. The first assumption that starts to emerge is lapse experience. So how long a policyholder, whether or not a policyholder keeps their coverage in force. And it takes at least 10 to 15 years to start to see an ultimate leveling out of lapses. And the issue with lapses is that, as we've noted, lapses have been lower than expected. So a larger cohort of policyholders are expected to go unclaimed than originally anticipated. So now we are starting to understand lapses better. The next assumption that we start to see is incidence. Like I said, it takes about 25 years before people start to go unclaimed. And the incidence is kind of when somebody triggers that claim event. Once somebody has triggered a claim event, there's still information to understand the level of benefits that they're going to be taking, so how much of their benefit are they using? And ultimately, the most difficult assumption that is still emerging is how long claims are lasting, so the severity of claims. And unfortunately, the issue with long-term care is that it's a very long-tailed product, so it takes a long time for experience to emerge, and we're still very early in the product cycle in terms of starting to see experience emerge. The Society of Actuaries did a pricing survey in 2016 that talked about the likelihood of premium rate increases based on the issue era of a block. And I think as an industry, the view is that newer cohorts of long-term care are less likely to have rate increases than some of the products issued, 10 years and older. But I can't give you necessarily a definitive answer on how much.
I would say industry-wide, we don't know for sure. We know the assumptions around lapse rates. We know that those were off. Those have been corrected. We didn't anticipate that interest rates would be in the sustained, very low interest rate environment for as long as we have been. Those adjustments can be made. Looking forward, there may be changes that go both ways, and I think that one of the questions that was raised, if we fix everything that we know is wrong today, will there still be things that we have to figure out? Will people continue to live longer? Will people continue to live longer with claims like dementia and Alzheimer's? But we don't have a silver bullet that says with a certain percentage of rate increase, we know that this will solve the problem. What we can say is we know that the errors that we have corrected shouldn't go against us, but we don't know whether new assumptions will emerge. But I think that's something that the industry is committed to working with regulators to make sure consumers know, okay, here's the best estimate that we know today, and here's what, based on those estimates, what it will take to fund the policies that you have.
Okay, thank you very much, panel, for being here. This was not easy for you, I understand that, but it was important. And for everyone else in the room, you'll notice that the insurance industry went last. Generally in these panels, they go first. I wanted them to hear everything that you had to say, but before they were able to leave, and they did. And I appreciate that. I appreciate your patience. I appreciate the patience of everyone here in the room. I think it was a good, productive use of our time today. Long-term care insurance will continue to be my top priority for the foreseeable future. No, there were no silver bullets, but The dialogue continues, and we'll continue that dialogue. I think we've made a lot of progress. They understand what we hear on a daily basis from the citizens of this state. I want to thank the Bar Association for letting us use this facility and for videotaping the entire proceedings. It will be on our website, be posted fairly soon, here again tomorrow. And our website is doi.sc.gov. You can go on there to look at these proceedings, but please go on there to look at any other type of information or information on any other type of insurance coverage that you have questions about. Our department is there to answer questions, either on the phone, or we have a portal on our website that you can ask the director questions straight from the internet. Thank you again for attending. Be careful on the way home. Thanks a lot.